And welcome everyone. My name is Alyssa Best, and I am a career advisor here in the AU Career Center. I work with the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Education students and alumni. And I also serve alumni who are more than 1 year out from graduation across multiple schools as well. So really excited to have you all here and to have our wonderful guests and Melissa and Meredith, who will introduce themselves. But our theme for today is around neurodiversity in the workplace. We want to keep this interactive, and we want to encourage you all to ask questions throughout. We'll definitely leave time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to to pose questions as they come up throughout the conversation. So Melissa, why don't we kick it to you first? Please introduce yourself and tell us about your current role.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I am currently a disability access advisor here at AU in the Academic Support and Access Center. We determine reasonable accommodations for students and really do our best to help them, guide them and professors with implementing those accommodations. And I also, on my own time, I serve as a volunteer council member on the DC State Rehabilitation Council. So where we look at basically district policies to determine effectiveness of job programs and policy supporting the district's residents with disabilities. And before moving to DC about 4.5 years ago, I was a teacher for about a decade, a special education teacher in Los Angeles Unified School District. And before that, I worked in fashion in New York City.
Oh, we may want to dive into that career transition. Thank you so much, Melissa. Left a little Easter egg there. I'm heavily relying on that phrase because of the particular time of the year. Meredith, let me turn it to you. Love to hear you share a little bit of an introduction, and I will just quickly share that Meredith is an alum of AU. So welcome back virtually to the AU community.
Thank you so much. My name is Meredith. Please forgive the cat trying to be in the screen. This is Franklin. He is my shadow. I graduated in December of 2018 from School of Communication, got my degree in filmmaking, and then thanks to AU, got sent to the UK on a Fulbright studying disability studies. I'm an autistic self-advocate, late diagnosed because of some gaps in diagnosis, which is a very common story. After my Fulbright, I now work for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network here in DC. I'm communications coordinator, but this fall I will be heading to law school. So a little bit of a transition for me as well. So.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Where will you be attending?
Great question.
Or you're making that decision right now?
It is, yeah. It's narrowed between either University of Chicago or Georgetown. So big decision still to make.
Wow, two excellent law schools.
Thank you.
To choose from. And welcome to Franklin. I have two. I'm physically in the Career Center, but when I am working virtually, sometimes my cats want to come in and hang out. So Franklin is welcome here as well.
Thank you.
So I was kind of thinking we have a set of questions for our guests, kind of how we're planning to structure this is, I'm just going to rotate kind of as we did just between Melissa and Meredith, and kind of a talk show host sort of format. And I'll pepper in some thoughts and comments as we go along as well. And so the first question I wanted to pivot back over to Melissa. First, kind of on a on the theme sort of language. And I know this is when Melissa and I had connected previously. She was sharing, she appreciated that we were framing this conversation as neurodiversity in the workplace. Tell us a little bit kind of from your perspective, what do we mean when we say neurodiversity or neurodivergence and some of the distinctions in that language?
Yeah. So neurodivergence is more like, it's a non-medical term. To me, it really describes functioning. So some brains develop or work differently than a brain that develops without a diagnosis, let's say. So this means a person who is neurodivergent has different strengths and challenges from people whose brains develop or work more, quote unquote, typically. Some people, it is important to note that like some people who are neurodivergent have medical conditions, but it also happens to be like to occur with folks who where there's like no medical diagnosis, at least it's been established at any time. And so then I would say neurodiversity is more of like a strength-based perspective, basically signaling like neurologic, cognitive differences that aren't viewed as deficits, where oftentimes I think looking at neurologic functioning, that very typical medical approach is like there is a deficit of some kind. And for some folks, that can really be good or bad. I feel like working in the ASAC, I come across a lot of students who are, young people who are so, first and foremost, I love the passion because, as you get older, it's like, a little less, passion about some things and more like, I don't know, just appreciation for the young people who are fired up and ready to roll. And so I think that, we hear a lot of students speaking from that, which is really exciting. They're speaking from that neurodiverse perspective of, it's a strengths-based thing. I do think it's important to note that when communicating, it's important to ask yourself, when you're communicating with someone, is this a person who's providing like a personal perspective versus a clinical perspective of, like with neurodiversity, like for me, for example, I come from a clinical perspective because I come from studying, and many people do, but like I would say, let's say, person first language. I can't bring myself to say autistic unless somebody is asking me to, because that's how they identify, and I want to respect that. But as a practitioner, it was ingrained in me, which, life is always in flux. You need to learn to move with the times. And so from the best practices perspective, it's looking at it like a person with autism. But there are so many different perspectives that's almost similar to neurodiversity and divergence from neurotypicality, so neurodivergence. Anyway, I'm going into all of this, medicalness and clinical perspective, but I do come from a very clinical perspective, though I have my own non-clinical perspectives because I myself, I had brain surgery at a young age, and so I have some brain damage, and I also have a nephew with moderate to severe autism. So there's a whole host of perspectives, really, and I think neurodiversity is that umbrella, whereas neurodivergence, to get back to your initial question, is, to me, is really about the act of and the functioning.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, and it also was a, kind of segued into something I also wanted to address, which is we see, and Meredith, I want to get your thoughts on this too, from, also within the work that you do at your organization, Meredith, the distinctions between, as you're saying, like person first, like, a person with this disability versus saying, kind of more of an identity based, and it does seem like there's distinctions within kind of where people are oriented around that. And I like what you said too, Melissa, about just, you may be trained in one way, but it's about kind of respecting how someone may express themselves as well. So Meredith, would love to have you kind of weigh in on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you'll notice that I use identity first when it comes to autistic person, and that's been a conscious choice that I and my organization have made. I've studied the sociological aspects of disability, and I have lived experience. That's a big argument, and we have a big resource on why we choose identity first for autistic persons specifically. But you'll notice that a lot of my siblings in the intellectual and developmental disability community especially prefer person first. And so when it comes to saying disabled person or person with disability, we switch interchangeably, but we default to lowercase a autistic person in all of our internal organization communication. And that has been my preference as well. But some of the oldest self-advocacy is done by people with IDD, and that person first language is so crucial to the history of our movement that, again, I'm not gonna argue about person first versus identity first, because the instinct to rely on what the person prefers is great, but also there are some big institution things happening with that language, and that was a big part of why I went to the UK to study the social model. But I think a big part of neurodiversity and neurodivergence is that it is such an umbrella for so many things, and I think that we are running into a problem where it's becoming interchangeable with autism, and it's not. It is an umbrella org. It is the queer to you're gay. It is does include everything from depression and anxiety to bipolar disorder, and there needs to be a lot of effort to include some of those especially stigmatized disorders. And so I think it gives us a lot of power because there's strength in numbers, and neurodiversity is a celebration and a coalition of a lot of different types of brains.
I love that. A celebration and a coalition of a lot of different types of brains. Yeah.
I have to agree. And that's really the beauty of diversity, any type of diversity you're speaking of, really. And I think that a lot of what applies to what we've been talking about in the last few years, there's been so much social growth in terms of inclusion, and really it used to be considered a sort of tolerance, and I always hated that word. I've always hated that word because I feel like it's just the minimum, and instead it's really appreciation, and I think that applies really well here.
And Meredith alluded to spoke on this as well, that it's in terms of when we talk about neurodivergence, that it's not one thing. It's, and I'm looking at an article on the Cleveland, according to the Cleveland Clinic, it could include autism spectrum disorder. It could also include ADHD. It could include dyslexia. It could include sensory processing disorders. It could include dyscalculia, which is difficulty with math, dyspraxia, which includes difficulty with coordination, and it can include mental health conditions like bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and more. So there is a wide range and a wide gamut of different experiences that people might have based on their brain-based differences. And I like this kind of thinking about it as a coalition across not kind of I think there's something that they talk about how how we all have unique fingerprints, that it's something that the article also alluded to, which is that it's don't want to read it exactly. I'm just scrolling through, but like a person's fingerprints, no two brains, this is interesting, not even those of identical twins, right? Are exactly the same. Because of that, there's no definition of normal capabilities for the human brain. And so that's, I think, something we're seeing a lot in the language. It's not about normal versus abnormal, right? So thank you for all that. Thank you for that excellent discussion. And so that was kind of wanted to help frame some of the terms that we're using, some of the some of the, as Meredith was saying, some kind of the distinctions between person first or identity first language, and to know there's once again a coalition and a celebration of a lot of different ways that we talk about this work. And so it could be something that, where we just are asking, as we do with pronouns. What pronouns do you use? What kind of language do you use to describe to describe yourself as well? If a person has obviously shared that and wants to talk about it and that kind of thing. In thinking through moving this into kind of a workplace scenario, maybe on the theme of the celebration, pivoting back over to you, Melissa, how can neurodiversity benefit teams of people and organizations?
So I think it's almost like the question should be, how wouldn't it? I just feel like how it's such an obvious answer, I would think. But I know that we're also in a world where there's a sort of it's evolving, and there's a new zeitgeist happening, and there's a new there's just so much growth, but it hasn't hit all companies or organizations at this point. And DC in and of itself, and a lot of urban hubs are very unique, where we're catching on to all of this, but others may be slower to do so. But to answer your question, really, I think it's similar to cultural and age diversity, which is often a forgotten one as well. But with perspective taking, including folks from all walks of life, including different abilities, different perspectives, creating a more accepting workplace with a richness that really can only occur with the diverse perspectives at the table. What'll happen is the productivity can change, and also just the typical exposure to different kinds of people, it really teaches people. You see in in applications, excellent communication skills, that sort of thing. Well, sure. So what does that look like in a workplace? Especially with in a neurodiverse workplace. I don't know if people are always really thinking about neurodiversity. They are thinking about diversity more and more these days, but now it's like, this is the next one that really should be highlighted, and really there should be some growth there. So I think that it goes back to that appreciation for different perspectives. And you look at what can occur when people truly work as a team and you have all different perspectives on a team. What do the results look like? And how would that benefit an organization? They're reaching across to more audiences. You can't make decisions. Well, people have done it and organizations have done it for many years in history, but making decisions for folks when you don't have those same people at the table. And while, one person, let's say, me having traumatic brain injury, I don't represent everybody who has TBI. There are people who say, hey, I am the only person of this culture here, and I don't represent everyone. So it's the same thing there, but the more and more people that we bring to the table, I think the richer the environment will be and the better the result.
Meredith, would you love to hear your perspective on how especially working in an organization that celebrates neurodiversity in the way that it benefits teams of people and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we are really good at understanding each other and understanding, I guess, we're sort of the canary in the coal mine, because if it's not accessible for the neurodiverse person on your team, it's probably not accessible for anyone, and that's going to be a problem. You know, if someone is not happy because of a lack of accommodations, there's more problems there, and burnout, and just a general bad work environment is sure to follow. And I don't know. We like to say when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and that was what your comments were making me think of, Melissa. I don't know if that's related to any of my other point, but it's also just that uniqueness, and everyone can bring something to the table. You just have to make sure that table is accessible, and then lo and behold, it becomes accessible to more and more. So.
And is it okay? I'd like to sort of piggyback off of what you're saying. You bring up some great points about accessibility. Me being the disability access advisor, I should have been, immediately. But there's just so many different directions you can go with this question, right? So I was thinking when Meredith was speaking, accessibility, I myself, just with my own personal experience, I feel very inspired by the students we have at AU, because I'm from a different time where I don't even think special ed classes in like the 1990s, I'm 45. So, in the 90s, we really didn't even in high school have special ed classes that I saw. And when I went to college, I didn't know that I could have accommodations. And so for me, there's a very different fear that I've had with applying for positions. Oh, they're not going to hire me, and that sort of thing. And really delving into sort of what the work world looks like now. And if a space, like there's something called universal design, many of us may have heard of this. Some students may not have, but if an office and an organization looks to universal design, whether physically or just, in its, what's the word? Just culturally, and in general, how it sets up its structure for the office. If it does it in a way that everyone can access it, then there is no need to really be mindful of somebody's disability and can they access this? Yes, because we've tested it and it's accessible to all. There's oftentimes in our department, we use this cartoon that's really great. There's somebody who is, some of you guys may have seen it, but there's somebody who's shoveling snow off the steps and he's saying, "Oh, I'll get to the ramp in a minute." But he'll shovel the snow off the ramp. But if he just shoveled the snow off the ramp first, everybody could go up. So that's sort of, a great little cartoon representing what universal design is. And I think that if more companies and organizations really look to that, then they can make it easier for everyone and less stress. It's a very emotional thing to say, am I going to be discovered, or how, and that's not everybody's perspective, but that can occur. And, with different age groups, it can often be a different perspective too. So.
I love this. Yeah. And anytime something that one of you says that sparks the other one, like this is, I love that. Like, I welcome that. I want this to feel like, as it is, a very fluid exchange. Meredith, I would love to ask if you could speak about your experience during the job search, during, I know you transitioned you did the Fulbright. I know that's an extremely intensive process as well. And also, share a little bit of, kind of your transition into the work you're doing now.
Yeah. So, I obviously masked very well for most of my life. I was diagnosed at 17 when I'm a textbook case. being raised and socialized as a woman, I learned to hide a lot of these traits. So a lot of my time at AU was sorting out what it meant for me to be autistic. And when I sort of went off the deep end, I no longer had the luxury of hiding because I was making it my pursuit. I have dedicated now my life to this so that not everyone has to disclose. And so that was a really difficult, there's no going back. When you have the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network on your resume, when you are going into disability law, when your why is your own diagnosis and the community that you've found and built, I can't not disclose anymore. So that's been really tough because a lot of it, my interviews and that kind of stuff, they know and I know that I'm autistic, and there's no more hiding that. And that has been, many times their first instinct was to be dehumanizing or be patronizing, and expect me to be younger than I am or to be less eloquent. I like to think I am. I will go home after this and not be, but I can make it through this interview. I can make it through this panel. I can speak to you and speak my my story so that we can get access to augmented and alternative communication for someone who is a non-speaker. Like there are ways that I am very, very, very privileged, and there are ways that I have now hidden or can no longer hide. So that has been, the interviewing is impossibly hard. But at ASAN, hiring looks very different, and we get a lot of feedback that this is an accessible hiring process, and we know it because we made it to our specifications, and they're very, very, very basic, which is wild that we do get so much feedback, just being wowed when it's offering the questions in advance or offering multiple formats of communication of that interview round. We do one regular interview round for a handful of candidates, and that can be in any format they want, text, email, Zoom, phone call. We still end up doing a lot of Zooms, but I've also texted with people to hire them. And then a second round, we do scenarios. We let them shine if they are better at communicating on written, true examples. It's no longer thinking on your feet about what you might be facing day to day. You get to think and have real, tangible examples of the work you might be doing. And we've found that has been really successful. And we're growing a lot, and we are doing a lot, and we're up against, we're the David to many Goliaths, and we do it accessibly and taking care of ourselves and others too. So I know it's not always going to be like ASAN, and I am not, it has not been easy to move on, but I am hopefully going to go spread this elsewhere. So.
And thank you so much for sharing also the ways that your organization adapts the interview process and makes it more accessible. Because as soon as you said that, I was about to say, tell us more, I want to hear more about that. And I know, being able to to get questions in advance, that's a huge one, to be able to feel prepared and not feel anxious kind of on having to come up with that information on the come up with a good response on the spot that's a great technique there as well. You mentioned masking, and I would love if you could expand a little bit about for folks who, I think that, it may be that's somewhat self-explanatory, but I'd love to hear you just share more about that.
Yeah, sure. So it's just I know the pandemic has ruined any sense of this being intuitive anymore, because we mask very differently since 2020. But it's sort of the act of becoming neurotypical, sort of faking it till you make it, and it's exhausting, leads to a lot of burnout. But for many people, it is a survival trait. And there's been some really interesting conversations, especially lately, about how there's been more of a movement to unmask and to be your true self. But for many people, they cannot. They are not safe. They are not, because of the color of their skin or their environment. If you don't put on a neurotypical face, you could be shot, you could be punished, you could lose your job and your livelihood. So for many people, it still is a necessary evil, while we work on the sort of acceptance part of people who move differently, people who think differently, people who are wired different. But that is part of human diversity.
Yeah, thank you. Melissa, curious thoughts, if you have things you would like to chime in on.
Yeah, what Meredith said, a few points that you both brought up were really great. Getting questions prior to, I love this idea, giving candidates questions prior to an interview is it's just kind. I mean, people, for example, I'll get on the bus. I've had this happen numerous times where I was on the DC bus on Glover Park, in Wisconsin, and this woman yelled at me because I was sitting in one of the front more seats for people with disabilities. And, I never blame. It's actually really kind of them to care that, oh, you're taking up someone's space, shame on you. But, what she didn't know was that I had a student when I was a high school teacher who hugged me and he pushed my vertebra right out because I have a rare neurologic disorder. So, what I'm illustrating here is that while I am not on, the spectrum, I have some severe neurologic challenges where I have word retrieval issues, and there are good days for me. They're like when my students with ADHD will mention, oh, I have some good days, I have some bad days. And it's the same thing for me, really, where, unfortunately, I have to drink a lot of caffeination in order to, I was on the hill this morning, and I was fully caffeinated, so all the synapses were working for me, because I'm constantly having to put on this face. It's that term masking. I'm like, yeah, that's a great term, because that's what I do. And I'm purely exhausted by the end of the day. And to keep a thought going, because I'm a very slow processor. Again, I have neurologic damage from my brain was pushing out of my skull, and there's damage. If I hadn't had surgery, the neurosurgeon said I would have been drooling in a walker by the age of 23. So while people can't see it and they just expect the same from me as everyone who may look like me or whatever, it's very hard to live up to something, especially when there's no visual indicator, and should there be, you can have a whole other conversation about visual indicators, right? Like that. But I really struggle. So the idea that companies and organizations can do more to support people with some, who are neurodivergent, it's almost like, I think that they have these concerns that there's going to be a lack of quality, that they may hire some organizations, not all, but oh, well, we need the people who can deliver ASAP and they need to think on the spot. And so why? And yes, that is very valuable in certain situations, but how can we still, let's take some time to think through this and look and see how we can not exclude people with some of these old-fashioned perspectives and ideas about what's necessary to get the job done and to get the job done well. So really, I think that like, I just really stuck with me when you said that your organization gives questions in advance. Because for me, that's, it takes time to process. And I see a lot of students come across my desk where, and I'm chatting with them and they're like, I'm a really slow processor. One of the most frequent accommodations that's requested at the ASAC is extended time on exams and quizzes. A lot of students, and it's not always, it can be anxiety, it can be a range of things, visual processing and all of that. But there are a lot of students who say, I'm a slow processor. It takes me time. And I always wonder, are they going to experience what I experience? And it's always this fear that you're going to be discovered. I mean, I'm used to getting yelled at on the bus. I've been yelled at in see, I'm experiencing it right now and it's embarrassing. But in the disability stalls, like this woman yelled at me because I physically, like, people can't see it, but I still have that need for that. So my point in all of that is just really saying, take that element of people needing to disclose and just create an environment, I think. But to what you were asking really about the job search, I think the two main topics that people might also be interested about is, to disclose or not to disclose. That is a very real question. And then for those truly looking for a diverse neurodivergent, friendly environment, how do you find this? So I don't want to take too much of the floor, obviously, so I can go into those in a few minutes. But yeah.
No, so just to say for me to make a mental note of what I'm putting a pin in, coming back to how to identify and find work environments that will be friendly and accessible. Am I getting that right, Melissa?
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, that, and I think really factors to consider when, as to whether or not you should disclose.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, because I know Meredith mentioned that earlier, and I did want to bring that up too, factors to consider. I just wanted to say, Melissa, I'm so sorry that you've dealt with that trauma, the way that people have acted towards you. And it sounds like you have such a wholehearted approach to being generous to people who are treating you poorly. And I'm just struck by that.
Thanks. No, it's, I think that people think they're doing what's right and what's best. And sometimes life is just, learning from somebody else. And if they're in a space and a mental state where you can say, hey, that's really nice. I didn't know for the restroom situation. I was just, because I was much younger and getting yelled at. And I thought, wait a minute, my friend has cerebral palsy and he waits to go to the bathroom too, like all of us. So, but that's not, the only disability, of course, that may need that stall. But life is a learning situation, right? So we have to be open to helping others learn, and not in a condescending way, but just, and appreciate the fact that, hey, that person, maybe they were sticking up for someone in their family who had a problem, a challenge. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can I ask, but because I'm so kind of caught on this example for a moment, how did you respond when the person on the bus?
So yeah, that was right before COVID. I was obviously older, and I didn't argue because we're sitting here. The bus was pretty crowded. The woman expected me to get up. I just said, I'm so sorry, I can't. I have a very sensitive spine. And there's always that feeling of oh, people are thinking, I don't care what somebody's thinking when it comes to my spine. I've had multiple spine surgeries and brain surgery, and in the end, that my safety matters. But if there's ever a situation, it's moments like this where, yeah, really, this is cool. I can go and explain. People may I think we all as humans have a tendency sometimes to say, oh, they don't understand what I have to go through, because life can be amazing, but it can be really challenging. But sometimes people, look that way and treat others that way. And then you just, if they're in a space where you can have that conversation, absolutely. I don't think on the wild, crazy bus, that was the moment for me, but to like sort of teach this person. But yeah, I just said, I can't, my spine. And so she probably thought I was lying, but maybe it'll make her think next time. So
yeah. And you can't change other people's behavior, but it sounds like you advocated for yourself, and ultimately, that's key. And it sounds like it's just obviously key. Key takeaway too is being compassionate towards other people, and checking our own judgments and assumptions that we may make, not knowing the full story about someone's life, and not knowing what they're going through. And I think also knowing, like, we all have different problems and challenges that we deal with, some small, some big, and we never know what's really going on with someone. So it's just, just a very much of a reminder of embracing that kind of attitude, I think, in a workplace setting, in the world, right? And the way we carry ourselves in the world, and being as trying to be as open-minded and compassionate, and but ultimately, obviously, like we have to self-preserve and advocate for ourselves, as you did. Yeah.
And I think your question can go also to, like we were talking about before, to disclose or not. Maybe there's somebody in the audience who feels, or the participation pool, sorry guys, who's like, I'm applying to jobs, I don't know, like they're asking me, should I, that's such a very personal decision. If, I say, look at where it is that you're, and I feel like a lot of students these days are very adamant and strong about, like, they know that, yes, this is my identity. I feel like they're off to a really strong start. I think there may be folks who are looking for a job, like on the Hill or someplace, and they're like, I don't know, how accepting is this office? And they may not know what to do, maybe doing some research. They're also in the usajobs.gov, like there's a quota that needs to be filled in offices. So it can actually boost your ability to, you get, like, I think 30 points starting off the bat if you have a Schedule A letter. Like, don't let, any fear take away any opportunities. So, I mean, I hid mine for years, and I'm exhausted trying to keep up. I figured, if I'm going to be applying to someone and they're going to underestimate me, great, let them underestimate and let me over deliver. If that's how it's going to go. And, and I think people overall these days are pretty accepting, as long as you deliver what needs to be delivered. And they can give you the supports. So,
yeah. And Melissa, and we can share this as a follow-up resource too. You mentioned the Schedule A hiring preference that the federal government has, and that I can also drop that into the chat too when I flip the question over to Meredith, because it's too difficult to talk and type to do. Our brains are actually, no matter where you are no matter how your unique brain works. I think the research is clear that our trying to both communicate over Zoom and manage a chat feature at the same time is actually, like, very overtaxing to the brain. A quick side note on that, I learned that, like, the phrase multitasking, it actually was never intended to be applied to humans. It's a computer tool. It's where we can have our Zoom up on our devices and have our email, and a web browser, and we can toggle between those things. And that's what multitasking actually is. But while our computers are great at it, it's very difficult to do that as with our own human brains. But what I was going to say is, with the Schedule A hiring preference, that is and that's appreciate that, Melissa, actually knowing the number. I don't think I knew like the actual number of points that's, it's, but if a candidate has a disability, there's, and a medical providers know a medical note to, that confirms that or supports that, diagnosis that can, or that condition that can be, something that can be an assist in the job search process. So that's a whole other thing, component around the federal job search. I'm going to and Meredith, this might be a good question to pivot over to you. Jackson in the chat is saying, I am entering a job in the U.S. intelligence community. I also have mild Asperger's/autism. Do you have any advice about how to navigate this field that I really love and I'm excited about joining, but I'm also a little worried about fitting in?
Yeah. There's no real easy answer, because I don't want you to not be yourself. This is maybe out of left field, but if you're here in DC, there's the Autistics Association of Greater Washington, AAGW. They meet twice a month, and have other like affinity groups. I would say go practice. I think there's something to be said about having a safe place to practice socializing. I went there for most of my AU career, and only because of COVID stopped. But it's autistic space, and it's an understanding space, and I could try out some things when it came to being an adult human being and having to walk into a space that you don't know anybody and get along and figure out spaces. And it's AAGW, Autistics Association of Greater Washington. Highly recommend. I was the youngest one there, but it's getting younger, and it's people from all walks of life. I thought of it because you said intelligence community, and I know there are people who were retiring from federal jobs after 40 years there, and learning to navigate and do that. And they were actually late diagnosed as well in their 50s, and had found this community to be really nice. I think that there is something to be said about autistic space and an understanding space to sort of fall back on, to spring forward into an unforgiving space of neurotypical people, and a professional space where it's hard to be professional for anyone. Starting a job is hard, but it's also, you have this added layer. So just try to connect with people. But all we want to do is connect. I know all we want to do is connect. And I'm sure this is a big interest of yours, having it be your career. But sometimes neurotypical people don't want us to keep talking about what we enjoy. Can you believe? I just think that they have a less joyful lives. Sorry, but that was a tangent. Go to AAGW and practice.
Thank you, Meredith. And as you're talking, I put that website into the chat feature, and then I also am putting into the chat a link to the Schedule A hiring authority. And once again, that is specific to the federal hiring process, but it has information that will take you. Oh, good. And Melissa, share with us what you're putting into the chat.
Yeah, so I put a few links in the chat. One for the CIA. I've noticed that in the intelligence community, I've been pretty impressed. It's likely not every agency. Every agency is different, has a different culture and whatnot. But a few years ago, I remember reading, and I found the article, that the Geospatial Intelligence Agency is taking workforce in a new direction, workforce diversity. I think that it's something that has very much, I have a friend in the Pentagon, and he said that they're really trying to get with the times and very much make it a more comfortable workplace for all. And just in general, in terms of your question, in terms of Jackson's question, navigating it, I think that there's a heavy push in hiring a diverse group of people. You may, it could be great to ask a question. Like one of the things I was going to recommend, and we can leave it for later as well, though, is informational conversations, or going to, with the intelligence community. Obviously, they're more careful with communicating about what they do with folks. So maybe like in the information sessions, that can be a question. AU has, the Career Center does a beautiful job with connecting students to the intelligence community, amongst many other workplaces, and coming up with some questions. I see all the time in Handshake, the FBI from the San Francisco office is coming, and the CIA comes frequently, and the defense intelligence community, probably saying that wrong, I'm so sorry. But having some of these questions is a great way to, at these information sessions, is a great way to ask those questions, but with the comfort of not being in an interview, or it depending on, your career depending on this sort of thing. So coming up with like a list of 4 questions, maybe 3 to 4 questions, and just know that, like, if they're not going to hire you for who you are, then even though this may sound painful in the moment, then, maybe that's not a great place to work, because if they're not accepting of people, it's likely a place that people are miserable at, and going into all types of folks. So, you just want to get your foot in the door and see where, you can move around once you get into the government, typically. So, just know that you're a great person and you have a lot to offer, and you have tons of things to offer that other people don't. And in the end, I mean, I work on a disability team, and I feel like I don't fit in sometimes, for sure. And I don't mean to put my team on blast, because this is an AU thing. They're an amazing group of people. I think it's more me that I don't feel like I fit in, and I do my best. I feel like that, little sister always running to catch up to the cool kids. That is absolutely me. And that's probably not you, folks, but so that's all I have to say.
I want to super quickly piggyback on that, because I popped disability in. They are not the be all end all, but if you are in this corporate setting, employee resource groups for disability identity is catching on. Like I have a friend who works at Chemonics doing international development, and is the co-chair of their disability ERG, and that has totally transformed her work experience. So if the organization you're going to be at has enough employees that they have an employee resource group for disability, great. You have people already there on your side, and that they're doing some great work. Or you can start one. You can start your own employee resource group for disability.
Excellent suggestion. Well, I know we have a few minutes here. I know we've had a couple questions peppered into the chat, but wanted to also just invite folks to pop in with a question, either into the chat, or you can take yourself off mute, whatever your preference.
Alyssa, our attendees, won't be able to unmute. So.
Oh, okay, got it. Thank you. I know. As soon as I said that, I realized I didn't know if I had control over that. So let's put that into the chat then. Oh, or in the Q&A, that's right. There is the Q&A feature. As folks are thinking, I was just going to, I know we've touched on this, but perhaps a parting question that I will throw in is, what is one additional tip maybe that we haven't touched on, or that you want to reiterate or emphasize for navigating the workplace as someone who identifies as neurodivergent? I appreciate what you said, Meredith. It's like, it's hard being it's difficult, like acclimating to being a professional, hands down.
Yeah, ask for accommodations. They are legally required to give them to you. And it's not, you don't have to come to the table knowing exactly what you want, and you won't necessarily get exactly what you want. The accommodations process is a collaborative conversation, but they have to give you accommodations, and don't be, because especially I know a lot of our conversation has focused around sort of pre-job and the process and the interview process. But once you're in, get that job, get those accommodations, and live your best life.
I definitely agree with that. And there's the jan.org that I think, I'm not sure if you, I remember I gave it to Alyssa the other day, but that could be something as a helpful guide. It's the Job Accommodations Network. I will say that as an accommodations person who determines accommodations, definitely you will likely be asked for, and AU does this from, requires this from its employees as well. If you're requesting accommodations, reasonable and appropriate accommodations, you need to have documentation typically. So just make sure that, you know, you read documentation guidelines carefully from your employer, just to make sure you have everything in its place, you know, because we notice a lot of students, I would say like half the students to a little over half may not read. And that might be different from somebody who's now out of college and looking for a position, or has gotten a position and, you know, it's secured, but you read the documentation guidelines or whatever the requirements are in terms of what you need to supply. And it can be challenging, but if you struggle to secure documentation that meets their guidelines, then just talk to them about it. Like there are ways to get, I mean, like I couldn't afford a neuropsych eval, so I went to Johns Hopkins, and I learned also, which I help my students with, you know, you get the billing codes and then check with that they use for a neuropsych eval, and then check and make sure your insurance covers it, that type of thing. So there are ways around some of these challenges. Just don't give up and ask people for help.
Ask people for help and organize so that some of those institutional barriers are no longer barriers down the line. I mean, like with this, it probably makes your life difficult, but for our college kid program, we work with them on going back to their campuses and not requiring the same kind of documentation, like lowering the barriers to access accommodations. And there's a question in the chat about innovative ways to include neurodivergent individuals in the workplace. I just sent my org's, gotta brag, resources on accessibility, including an event planning checklist. This goes beyond like the ADA and sort of baseline accessibility, which we know is not baseline, but it's still, a lot of people are still struggling to clear that. But when it comes specifically to autism and neurodiversity, we have some specific inclusion resources there. And I had to promote my org.
I know that. Thank you. And that's an excellent way of answering the question and putting in we'll make sure that all these resources go out as well following the call. I know we're wrapping up on, or we're just slightly over the hour, but I also just wanted to share I think in terms, you know, talking about asking for help, I think that these are I would encourage folks to also, orient questions they might want to ask in an interview around, we talk about sometimes like individuals will ask me, should I ask a question about like, what's the workplace culture? And I'm like, yes, but that's such a broad question. What in particular do you want to know about? Do you want to know, like, does the organization, like, how do they celebrate wins? Is like, what is the work-life balance? Do they like, what's the culture around, like, do people actually take their vacation time, or like, is it a work culture question? Like, are you going to find someone still online after 5 p.m.? Like, there's a lot of different things about work culture. And then this can be also, I think, a part of it too, is, how do you celebrate or, accommodate neurodivergent, or celebrate neurodiversity and accommodate neurodivergent people in your workplace? That could be a question one could ask in an interview. What kind of flexibility do you offer to individuals who may need additional accommodations or support? I know I have a friend who has ADHD, and she was saying she has to go into the office. She's in a hybrid modality, and I think has to report 3 days a week. But one thing she was saying, that she was like, I'm realizing that, I'm saying I as her, she was quoting to me, like she was saying, I'm realizing that I need to, some days some weeks I want to flex which days I go in, maybe I want to change that. I need some flexibility around that, or I might need some flexibility around the start time. It's, difficult for her to, certain days she may be feeling slower to get out of the house to get to work and things like that, and like wanting modified start time. So I think she was saying that was kind of to bringing both of your points. I think she was saying she was going to be submitting maybe some further documentation to try to get, but some of these things could be, but it could, I think maybe in her workplace, she may have to go through some more bureaucratic steps. But it could be something that those also could be conversations one could have with their manager too, especially like when you, I'm not sure if I would advise getting into too much in the weeds about scheduling and things like that during the interview process. But at the point when a job, of course you could ask questions about like, oh, what are kind of like the work expectation? Are you in a hybrid modality, or are, people in our staff, do they report the same days each week to the office, or is there flexibility around that, or how is that handled? But in terms of, you could of course like get curious about that, and then at the time of getting the offer, I would say would be the time to get like particular about kind of what you're seeking and clarifying that. But that could also be a question one could ask without disclosing, without going into a whole lot of like bureaucratic stuff with the supervisor too, just to ask like, oh, what's the flexibility if I'm like typically in like Tuesdays and Thursdays, is there flexibility if I want to come in Wednesdays, Fridays sometimes, or if I want to, work a 11 to 7 schedule instead of a 9 to 5, or whatever it may be. Like there's some of that can be, perhaps discussed. Would you both agree with that? That could, some of the conversations could be somewhat informal in nature too, and with one supervisor.
Yeah, I think it depends on the structure of where you work. Sometimes your supervisor is HR, unfortunately. Well, for better or worse, there's good and bad to that. But yeah, it's always a bit of, there's self-report, a person's self-report in conjunction with documentation, and the self-report is primary, very important, and they likely have an association that they have to adhere to as well. So like for we as a university adhere to not the employer aspect, but for students is AHEAD. So the Association for Higher Education and Disability. And while many students will say, well, I didn't have to do that at this university, and you're making me get documentation. I'm like, oh, well, we meet with universities across the country and we have this exact discussion, and we have best practices we adhere to. So that may occur with employers as well. So it's something to look into. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, I know we are so mindful of time. It's 7:07. I like that number there. So I wanted to, I will make sure to get both of your information, if you're both willing to be, of course, available as resources. We'll put that in our follow-up as well. Thank you to both of you so much. This is such a rich discussion. I would love to continue, but I'm sure that with coming up on the dinner hour, people are probably ready to wrap up, and those who've been very on task, who might need a brain break, going to give you all a chance to have a refresher. But thank you so much, and look forward to continuing. And for any of the students or alumni who might be joining, if you would like to schedule a time to debrief this with me, I'm more than happy to do that, and excited to carry on this conversation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.